We just buy whatever.
Okay, we're going to begin. So we're continuing this awkward topic. So the topic is do our various ethical laws apply to non-Jews as well as to Jews? And some of this is kind of shocking for us, but it's going through an interesting discussion about kind of the limits of tribal loyalty, but also the limits of values. And are there values that are universal, values that only apply to your particular community or group? So that's we've been doing that for the last couple of weeks. If you recall, it just came up by the way when we were studying the obligations of employers to employees. But then I decided to look up the actual discussion in the Talmud, so that's what we're doing right now. We'll probably finish it today. We did half of it last time. So if you want to follow in the English, you have to turn to the first English page. Or maybe it's the first English page. And you want to find footnote 4 on that page. So it's on the second paragraph. But Abai said to him. So that's where we are in English. If you're going to follow in Hebrew, we're almost exactly halfway through the first page of Hebrew. It's not actually Hebrew Aramaic. Ella Amar Rava. Oh, I'm sorry. I got it wrong. I'm sorry. So in the English, what you want to do is you want to go to 11. Okay, in the English you want to find footnote 11 towards the bottom of that page, where it says Rava therefore said. Okay, that's where I am, and in the Hebrew it's Elamar Rava. Okay, Elamar Rava. So Rava said. So the discussion started with Gzela, and they're using the word Kanaani here, but Kanaani means Nochri or non-Jew. Is it permitted to steal from a non-Jew? Because there's this odd opinion that it might be. So they discussed that for a little while. And if you recall, just to give context, it says that we're talking about corrupt customs collectors or corrupt tax collectors who are non-Jews collecting for the non-Jewish government, and we understand that they're crooked and that they're corrupt and they're out on their own. So essentially they're robbers themselves, so you're allowed to rob from them. At least that's a possibility. And then Akiva even discounts that, saying that it'll make us look bad. Well, is making us look bad the issue here, or is it really a universal value? That's what we've been discussing so far. So, Elamar Rava lo kasha. So Rava says this is not about kan b'gzela. So we're not talking about b'gzela, about stealing. The kan b'havkat halvato. So now he introduces something else. It could be that the way you distinguish between Jews and non-Jews is that we have this custom from the Torah that you cancel debts. Sometimes, it's the 7th year, sometimes the 50th year. It's complicated, but it doesn't matter. So we have this custom where you cancel debts. Maybe he's suggesting that that only applies in the Jewish community, that whole concept of canceling debts. Or, you could extend that and say that lending not at interest, which has been an issue in Jewish history. You lend at interest to non-Jews, but you don't lend at interest to Jews. There's been literature or plays written about that. So that's what Rava is suggesting. Maybe that's the issue. Okay, so Amar le Abai. Then Abai says, Eved ivri hafka'at halvatohu. So, but Abai says back to him that canceling a debt and the whole law, which we had last week, of freeing slaves. So it goes back to that too. Remember, there's an obligation to free Hebrew slaves. That's how we know, by the way, that you're not allowed to steal from non-Jews, because the obligation to free Hebrew slaves from non-Jewish masters doesn't extend to stealing them back. You're not allowed to steal them back. You actually have to pay them, and you haggle with them, and you pay a fair price. So that's how we know you're not allowed to steal, because otherwise, why would you have to pay them at all? You just get them out no matter how you can. But what Abai is saying here is conceptually, the commandment to free slaves and also to cancel debts in the sabbatical year and the 50th year are basically the same thing. I'm not going to go through his reasoning because that doesn't matter to us right now, but he's saying it's essentially the same law. So therefore, if the whole thing about freeing slaves extends to non-Jews and relationships with non-Jews, then also canceling debts should also extend to non-Jews. Okay, that's Abai's. So that's Abai's objection. But I'm going to keep going. Rava latame. So Rava says Damar Rava. Eved Ivri, Gufo Kanui. So it said even Rava would agree with me, because Rava explains that the reason that you're supposed to, the reason that a Jewish person, an Israelite person, would become a slave in the first place is to cancel a debt.
That's right.
Is to cancel a debt. So the idea of debts being canceled in the seventh year are inextricably connected to the idea of a slave going free. Because the point of a slave having the right to go free. And the reason that you should redeem Hebrew slaves is because there's a point where their debts are canceled. And that's why. And the reason a person becomes a slave in the first place is to cancel a debt. So then you work off that debt. And then the master has to free them. So if the non-Jewish master is not doing it, you get together the money and you free them. Or, of course, in our own community, our own society, you free them anyway in the 7th year or the 50th year. Okay? Now I'm going to keep going because it gets a little more complicated. Amar Rav Bibi bar Gidel, Amar Rabbi Shimon Chasida. So Rabbi Bibi, the son of Gidel, says in the name of Chasida, Gezel Kanani Asur. Okay, so he says, we established, therefore, to steal from a non-Jew is Asur, forbidden. However, there's another, and this is why this is fascinating. We're still trying to find ethical values, certain customs that only apply to us and not to them. And even the us and them is a slip. Those terms become slippery. Avedato muteret, gzelo asur. All right, so we are allowed to keep the things that we find that belong to them, but we're not allowed to steal from them. Okay, so you may be aware that it's a very important commandment in the Torah that if you find something, you have to not just return lost objects. I mean, there's pages and pages, and many, many years ago, we studied that in the Talmud class, all the laws about returning lost objects. Very complicated, but I have to say, a very severe responsibility. If you even see a lost object, as soon as you make eye contact, that's how they interpret that. Even making eye contact with a lost object puts you in relationship with that lost object, so you have to pick it up, find the owner, go through all the headache of finding the owner, and then return it. So maybe, that's what they're suggesting here, maybe that only applies to Jews. But when it comes to non-Jews, first of all, we don't have all that obligation, but we're actually allowed to keep it. We can keep lost objects that belong to non-Jews. They're suggesting that. Okay, so now we're gonna play with that a little bit, dig down into that. Okay? Dimar Rav Huna. So because Rav Huna actually says, Minayin legezel knani shu asur. How do we know that stealing from a non-Jew is forbidden? Shneemar, v'achalta et amim, because it actually says, now achalta et amim means literally to eat, right? Achalta, but it means to oppress. So you can oppress or exploit. That's achalta ziz. You can use up their resources. V'achalta et amim, asher Adonai Elohecha noten lecha. Those countries that God gives you in battle. Now here's his interpretation of that. Bizman shehem misurim biadecha. That's only at the time when you are in battle with them. And then God has given you victory. But at the time when God doesn't give you to them, which basically means at times when you're not in conflict from them, then you are not allowed to take and steal from them and exploit them. So the only time you can ever exploit non-Jews is when you're in battle with them and you're winning the battle, and it's in these Canaanite battles, when Joshua comes in, then God gives you permission to take their stuff. Under any other circumstances, you're not allowed to take their stuff. But it goes on, Avedato muteret. But you are allowed to keep the things that they've lost. Things you see on the street, the $10 bill, you notice. If it belongs to a non-Jew, of course you have to find out, does it belong to a non-Jew? And again, it's just a suggestion. Maybe you're allowed to keep those, okay? Dema Rav Chama, because Rav Chama said Bar Guri, in the name of Guri, in the name of Rav. Now here's the derivation. Minayin la'avedata kanani shehu muteret. How do we know that the finding of a non-Jew, and I said before, the censor is changing this to Kanani, Canaanite, but it doesn't mean Canaanite, it means non-Jew. How do we know it's permitted? Shneemar. Now we go back actually to the Torah, where the Torah commands us to return lost objects. Lechol avedat achicha. That you have to return lost objects that belong to, and the word here is achicha. Achicha means your brother. Your brother implying, for here now in the Talmud, it's implying your fellow Jew. However, of course, it really just depends on who you are and who's reading this. Achicha can also mean your fellow human being, right? It can also mean your brother, literally your brother, or it can mean your cousin. I mean, really, this depends on what lens you're bringing to this. Now, I don't think it's inappropriate for the Talmud here to say achicha, let's say in this context, probably means Jew in our Jewish community. In the Jewish community that we are trying to establish in our close circle, to have good relations among each other, to establish a kind of intimacy in the community, that's the point of that law. There are others. Now, you don't steal from those others, right? Because that's wrong. However, to go to the extra effort of returning their lost objects, maybe you don't. That's what he's suggesting here. And so the achicha, to him, clues him into we're talking about ethical values that apply within the group, but maybe have a weaker hold. It's not like you're not allowed to return the lost objects, but you're not required to when it's not achicha, when it's not your group. But we're not done yet. La achicha tamachzir, you return lost objects to your ach, your people. The iya tamachzir la kna'ani. Here he's defining with the not ach, not the brother, means the kna'ani, means the non-Jew. Okay. All right. Now we're going to analyze that a little bit. Okay. Ve'ema. So I could say, when you have that word ve'ema, it's introducing, playing around with an idea, experimenting. I'm experimenting with this idea. I could say, hanimile, those words that you don't have to return lost objects to non-Jews, hecha delo ate liadeh. Okay, that applies when you don't have it in your hand. Okay, so like you're walking down the street and you see something and you know, oh, that belongs to Mr. Non-Jew, Mr. Canaanite. That belongs to Mr. Canaanite. I sort of recognize it, but it's a pain in the neck to schlep it, and I don't know, and I'm in a hurry. Now, if it belongs to a Jew, I mean, the commandment is that, you know how they analyze it. I mean, as soon as you see it and you know who it belongs to, then you're in relationship with it, and you have to find the owner, you have to return it. But they're suggesting that thing over there, that car, that belongs to Mr. Non-Jew, and I don't have to return it. However, if I actually have it in my hand, maybe that's it. If I have it in my hand, aren't I then obligated to return it? Because there's a difference between having it in your hand and just seeing it. Remember, they're always trying to split the difference here. So maybe if you just see it, I don't have to go to the trouble of finding the non-Jew and returning it. But if I have it in my hand, are you telling me that I'm allowed to keep it, even though I know the owner? I know the owner is. So that's what they're suggesting. It's like stealing. Delo atiliadeh. Delo atiliadeh. If it hasn't come into your hand yet, delo mechayev lahadure batra. Aval hecha da'atiliadeh emen lahadre. So, but if I have it in my hand, I should say, or I'm suggesting, then I should be forced to return it. Then I should have that obligation. So, as they're experimenting with what constitutes a universal value, I've got that thing in my hand. It's got his name in it. It's his pen. I know it's his name. No, I know he's a non-Jew, but I still be able to return it. And are you telling me I shouldn't? That's what they're suggesting. Let's drill down. What does that mean to say I don't have to return lost objects of non-Jews? Okay. Now Ravina has an answer. Mar Ravina, umatzata. The commandment actually says, and you found it. And if you remember, if some of you were in that Talmud class, the word "and you found," they eventually define as meaning you're holding it in your hand. So you're holding it in your hand. You have got that contact with it. Da'ate liyadeh mashma. It means that it's in your hand, and therefore, so even if you have it in your hand, they're suggesting you don't have to return it. Tanya Rabbi Pinchas ben Yair Omer. Okay, so but Rabbi Pinchas ben Yair says, "B'makom sheyesh chilul Hashem, afilu aviyato asur." So now Rabbi Pinchas says, in a place where this might lead to the desecration of God's name. So remember what desecration of God's name means here? It means it has nothing to do with God, actually. Right. It has to do with our reputation. So in a place where not returning lost objects that belong to non-Jews are going to damage our reputation. Damaging our reputation in the Talmud is often referred to as chilul Hashem, the desecration of God's name, because we're dealing with pagans in the Talmud too. So if we ourselves look bad, it makes God look bad, and we don't want God to look bad, so we better be on our best behavior. Now, is that a particularly noble sentiment? Well, not really, because we're just worried about our reputation and not the absolute value. Okay, and here's what I'm trying to explore a little bit. When is something an absolute value? When does it have to do? When is it instrumental? I mean, it's instrumental in the sense that we don't want to look bad. If we look bad, it will damage all of our relationships. It will damage our business relationships. It will damage maybe our safety. Because if we start getting a reputation and we're a minority as people that don't return lost objects, it's going to make them resentful about us. And I was at a meeting not that long ago. I don't want to go too deeply into this, where there are people at the meeting, and I respect this. I'm not sure some of you were there, but they were talking about Jewish endowment funds, right? So there's every city, just about every big city's got some kind of Jewish endowment fund, and much of that money, of course, goes to non-Jewish institutions. I mean, we like to think, we in the Jewish community think, why do you have a big Jewish endowment fund? To give me the money, right? To give my institution the money. Where else would you give the money? Obviously, you want to give it to me or to our institutions. Why do you have a Jewish endowment fund? And the fact is that the great majority of money in Jewish endowment funds goes to fund non-Jewish charities. Okay, so there's I don't know if you knew that. That's true. Yes, well, that's because Jews support Jewish and non-Jewish charities, and they use their endowment funds, which is a convenience, of course, to where you're going to park your money. And that's where the interest comes. And then you get to decide. It's a donor-advised fund. And you say, I want some of it to go to Bethel. Hopefully, all of it goes to Bethel. But that's not how donors work. So donors have other interests. I mean, I can't believe it sometimes. But really? You're interested in things other than Bethel? How could that possibly be? I mean, so we have that kind of tunnel vision about. But the fact is that donors have other interests. So the question sometimes donors ask is, well, why is there a Jewish endowment fund at all? Because I can have my own donor-advised fund to give to Bethel, and to give to the zoo, and to give to hospitals. So the answer is that, no, we want the money to come from the Jewish endowment fund when you're funding a cancer hospital or a homeless shelter, even if it's not Jewish. Why? It makes us look good. It makes us look good. Out in the community, the non-Jews understand that we are generous people and that we support these things. Okay. Now, is that a particularly noble sentiment? I mean, it's not an ignoble sentiment. I mean, what you want is that I'm supporting this because I believe in this, and that's why I'm giving the money. And the added benefit of that, it makes Jews look good. Well, that seems like it's selfish. It's a self-interested desire. But the fact is that's how people are complicated. So you can have both at the same time. So all that's going on here. So yes, it's nice to think that we have our own values in our community. We take care of each other. We're also going to take care of non-Jews, because it's the right thing to do, but also because it makes us look good. Right. And making us look good could actually have very meaningful implications for us, especially if we're a minority. I mean, we have these discussions also in our homeless shelter, which almost only serves non-Jews. And sometimes it's not the reason we do it. But there is this factor where, looking back, those people that were served by us are going to think, hey, those Jews, and sometimes you hear bad things about Jews. Those Jews that other people are saying bad things about, I know something about those Jews, right? They were with me when I was at a terrible time in my life. And I'm not unhappy that happens. I feel like that's okay. I mean, if by doing good we also improve our reputation, that's not such a terrible thing. So all that's going through the mind of the Talmud as they're going through what distinguishes us from Jews and not Jews. We want to have our own community with our own values that apply just to us, but we also have this thought about universal values and also just a good reputation. Even in the Talmud, Jews aren't living in isolation. Or I would say especially in the Talmud. There are times in the Bible where the Bible is imagining a pure Jewish state. This is the way we want to act because we're creating this kind of polity that's just Jews. But even in the Bible, that's a fiction. There's always non-Jews around. You're always dealing with the other. All right. Let's keep going. But makom sheyesh evadato asur. So when there's chilul Hashem, when there's a damage to our reputation. Amar Shmuel says, ta'oto moteret. So here's something else. When a non-Jew makes a mistake in a business deal, we can keep the mistake. Suggesting that too. With a Jew, for sure. A classic example is this: the cashier gives you too much change. So it's his mistake. It's his mistake. So the bank makes a mistake, gives you too much money. This is very clear in the Torah that you're supposed to correct the mistake. But maybe it's a Jew versus non-Jew thing again. Ta'oto muteret. Maybe I can keep it if it's a non-Jew. Okay. Now here's an example of that. Kiha de Shmuel zavan mikuti. So Shmuel bought from a kuti. A kuti is another word for non-Jew. Clearly the censor changed it because a kuti means like a pagan, but it means a non-Jew. Bought from a non-Jew. Likana de dahava. He bought something that turned out to be a golden bowl. Bimar to buzz parzala, but both Shmuel and the seller thought it was made out of copper. So he got a great deal. Because what was made out of gold, in fact, what he thought was made out of copper, in fact, was made out of gold. And he spent 4 zoos on it. We know how much zoos are because that's how much a kid costs. Chad gadia, one goat. Yeah, be tre zuzeh. That's the Aramaic everybody knows, right? Chad gadya tre zuzeh. So he doubled that, right, for this bowl. But in fact, it was worth 5 zuzeh. He got avla lecha zuzeh because he made an extra zuz on it, and he didn't tell the seller because he figured the seller's a non-Jew, and now there's something that's deeper that will go on. It's not good. I don't like it. I mean, a lot of this makes us uncomfortable, right? To me, it doesn't matter. Really, for me, it doesn't matter Jew and non-Jew. You're gonna tell. You've got an obligation to tell that person or to return it. I think you do. But that what we're doing in the Talmud is experimenting with his ideas. And we do later in the discussion have a justification for it, which has nothing to do with Jew non-Jew. It's just that it's the buyer's responsibility to set the right prices, and it's not my responsibility to go back and correct the buyer. Okay. Seller. I'm sorry. Yes. Seller. Right. Yeah. Just like it's buyer beware, it's seller beware too. So, okay. But let's go on. Rav Kahana, Zavan Mikuta, Mea v'esrim Chavita b'mea. All right. So Rav Kahana purchased 100 barrels of something, and but he got 120. Okay. V'avla lechad zuzah. And he also gained 1 zuz for that. In the Hebrew, we're turning the page. All right, and again saying this is from a non-Jew, so the non-Jewish seller, and the rabbi here is saying I didn't have a responsibility to give him back the zuz. Now he says Amarle chaze de'allah kasamichna, because he says it's actually up to you to pay attention when you're loading those barrels. I bought 100, you loaded 120 into my truck. It's actually your responsibility to count it, not my responsibility to count. Okay, so here actually he gives an excuse for it that has nothing to do with Jew and non-Jew. Here the excuse has to do with the buyer or the seller. Okay. Now here's another case. Ravina, so another rabbi. Zavan dikla, hu v'kuti litzlacha. All right, so Ravina buys a tree, a dekel. A dekel is still a Hebrew word. And, I can't remember the dekel. What kind of tree is a dekel? A palm tree. Yeah, buys a palm tree. But he bought it with a non-Jew in partnership, and they were going to divide it up. Amar le l'shma'e, says to his assistant, Kadam va'aite me'ikaro. Okay, so what they're going to do is cut it up for firewood. Or they're going to cut it up, it may not be firewood. They're going to cut it up for branches or whatever you do for wood to build things. So he tells his assistant, quick, go and take the places that are closest to the root. In other words, he's assuming those are better. Okay. Dekuti minyana yada. And he says to him, because for non-Jews, they actually don't care about the quality of the wood. They care about the number. Right? Because you're going to end up, as you cut it up, you're going to end up with 40 pieces. So all this non-Jew over here, it's pointing to his non-Jewish partner, all he cares about is the number. I actually care about the quality. Now, is it better, not better? I want the stuff that's closer to the root. I mean, it could be, because for my purposes, that stuff works better for me. This could be, and I'm not saying it is for sure, it's a possibility that this is a not so subtle critique of non-Jews, thinking, they don't think about quality.
They look for the choice.
All they think about is the pure numbers. We have more refined brains. Look, this it's not like this stuff doesn't exist. This kind of bigotry does. It exists. And he might say, so for them it doesn't even matter. I'm telling you, all my partner cares about. Now the bad thing here is that the problematic is that he's extrapolating to all non-Jews. He's saying all non-Jews, all they care about is the number, not the quality. We Jews have maybe more sophisticated tastes, more sophisticated brains, so we care about the quality. So it's not going to matter to them. It matters to us. So you go and get the good stuff. Okay? And here, really coming close, I mean, in some ways crossing that line of bigotry, but trying to figure out, okay, what can we do for Jews? Because what he's saying is I would never do that for a Jew. For a Jew, I would explain it first, but for the non-Jew, I can just take the higher quality. Okay, almost done. Rav Ashe, and I'll finish with this. Rav Ashe haveka azil ba'orcha. Rav Ashe was walking down the road. Chazay shipsha degufna pardesa. So he sees these branches of a vineyard that are overhanging onto the public thoroughfare, which theoretically you're allowed to take. That we've had long discussions about this too. If the apple tree is growing on your place, but what if it leans over into the public thoroughfare or to your neighbors? Who gets the apples? Okay. V'talebe tikufi de inuve. And some branches of grapes were hanging over into the public domain. Amar le l'shma'e. He says to his assistant. They all had assistants, these rabbis. So, Zil chaze, Go and see. Ida kute ninu aite. If that field, if the vineyard belongs to a non-Jew, take it. Take the stuff that's overhanging. Ida Israel ninu lo aite li. Okay? And if it belongs to a Jew, don't take it. Don't bring it to me. Now, so he says this to his assistant. Shma hahukute. Now, unfortunately, the non-Jew heard. The non-Jew hears this. Wait.
It's in his vineyard.
Yeah, this is, first of all, is my vineyard, and you're distinguishing between Jews and non-Jews. So, Shma hukute, dehaviati pardeso. He happens to be sitting there in his field. Amarle, dekute shari. And I say, wait, you're because I'm a non-Jew, and in non-Jews you're allowed to take? Amarle says to him, kute shakil dame. So he says, in my experience, non-Jews are okay with selling that stuff. Israel lo shakil dami, but Jews don't like to sell that stuff. So first of all, he's saying two things to him. He's saying, well, I was going to pay you for them, and he's also saying that, and the reason I was asking Jew non-Jew is because in my experience, non-Jews will sell that stuff because they think whatever reason, if it's going into the public domain, they're willing to sell it, and Jews are not willing to sell it. So then that's the end of the discussion, and it ends up in we can discuss it more maybe next time. We're sort of out of time, but it could be in this very, very narrow place of that may be all we're left with of branches hanging over into the public domain. There's a difference, and in some ways it's leading to this just a preference between Jews and non-Jews. So we treat Jews and non-Jews differently because they have different preferences in business, maybe quality versus quantity, or valuing the branches that hang over the fields and not valuing them. But the hard and fast moral decisions, we don't make those distinctions. Stealing, and even going to returning lost objects or canceling debts. In those, we keep those as universal values that apply to Jews and non-Jews alike. Yes?
Well, this is the first part of this discussion that it talked about the morals of the non-Jew, and I think that was missing for me.
The voice of the non-Jew.
And because, for example, returning lost object, if the non-Jews don't return lost objects, and we do, maybe we're nice, but we also think it might look bad on us because it makes us look like we're stupid and foolish. So
right.
I missed that in this discussion. What was the values in that world?
Now that you mention it, what's very interesting is at the end, non-Jews appear twice, because the first time there's a business partner. Remember that they buy this tree together.
Right.
So there's a business partner. So that guy is silent, a silent partner, let's say in the Talmud. He's silent. He's silent in the sense that he doesn't speak. I mean, nobody asks him, hey, is that true? Do you care more about the quality than you do about the quantity more than the quality? But in the very end, where we end the discussion, there's actually a voice of a non-Jew. Hey, what about me?
Right.
So it leads, and at first it's very much steal from non-Jews, it's permitted. Yeah. And then as the discussion moves, suddenly non-Jews, I never noticed this till you said it, so thank you. Suddenly non-Jews become actors in the skits, because a lot of these things are skits. And in the drama itself, an actual non-Jew appears. First as a business partner, which means a lot actually. It means that,
there's a trust relationship.
That we have interactions with them, business interactions with them, and then there's a voice. And the voice is important. Yeah. Okay, we'll stop there.